Joining us, Punchbowl News co-founder and MS Now political contributor Jake Sherman, managing editor of The Bulwark and MS Now contributor Sam Stein, director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, and editor-in-chief of The Crystal Ball, Larry Sabato, and Washington correspondent for the Texas Tribune, Gabby Birnbaum. So, Gabby, Texas, this is your wheelhouse. Explain to me what's going on.
Yeah, I think there are a few dynamics that might underscore why leadership and others, I think, have been hesitant to fully call for Gonzalez to drop out or resign or what have you. Number one, he's facing a really difficult primary next week. He's running against Brandon Herrera, who's a sort of gun rights influencer, YouTuber. Last year, the two went to, in 2024, the two went to a runoff where Gonzalez won by under 400 votes. So this was already going to be a difficult primary for him, even without these allegations, right? B, as you mentioned, I think there are politics at play here, right? Some Texas Republicans have made this explicit when discussing the situation. They say this is really unfortunate and they want it to be investigated, but that with the majority under such a narrow margin, the loss of any one member could throw the chamber into chaos, as one Texas Republican told me. And so I have to think that that's playing out in people's minds here in D.C. as well.
So, Jake, is that what it is? A one-seat majority. He resigns now, and Speaker Johnson has no control?
I mean, that is what Gabby said is certainly true, right? It wouldn't change the immediate math, but that it just makes it more difficult for Mike Johnson to do anything. A couple dynamics to think about. If Gonzalez loses his primary on Tuesday, certainly a possibility, could go to a runoff, million different not really a million, but a couple different permutations of this. If he does not win, I can't imagine him sticking around. He's going to be the subject of an ethics investigation, which is going to be very probing of him and the ethics committee has subpoena power. They could compel witnesses to testify. They could go after documents. Is he going to want to go through that when he's not even going to be here next Congress? That's number one. Number two, Johnson's retort, Katie, is that he wants to let this investigation play out. He says he keeps it even for Democrats and Republicans. He wants all investigations to be seen to their conclusion, and that's his position. Now, that's a convenient thing to say right now. There's no one on the Democratic side in a similar situation. I don't know what it would be like if the shoe were on the other foot. He mentioned that there is a member of Congress under indictment, a Democratic member of Congress under indictment, and he wants that to play out as well. So, take that for what it's worth. Number three, just a side note, because I've been watching Gonzalez and a lot of people in the House for a long time. Kevin McCarthy and Tony Gonzalez had a very bad relationship. McCarthy blocked him from being on the Intelligence Committee when he was a sophomore, and it ended in a humongous rift between McCarthy and Gonzalez that has lasted until today. Now, what McCarthy is saying is what a lot of House Republicans feel, and as you noted, 7 have said so publicly. This is an ironclad rule. You may not have relationships with people who are in your employ. Period. The end. And I think the Ethics Committee is going to take that up if Gonzalez wins his primary next week.
What is Nancy Mace calling for?
Mace is suggesting, I want to make sure I get this right, but I believe she is suggesting that the Ethics Committee must, if her resolution is passed, release any report of any allegations of members having relationships with people on their staff. Or sexual harassment. That's right. I'm not sure that the House is going to pass that. I don't know if it's even going to get to the floor. Maybe it will. I just don't know. I haven't asked that question of the leadership because that was so new as of 24 or so hours ago. All right. So leaving aside, again, Kevin McCarthy is, he's got a lot of baggage here. Number one, the Mar-a-Lago thing I mentioned, but also as Jake was outlining, the bad personal relationship. But Sam, does he have a point that there has to be a standard?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the analogy he drew to what would happen in a private sector operation is so very clear that it's kind of galling that, other people aren't pointing it out. If this happened in any other employment, if a boss was having an affair with a subordinate, if there was contemporaneous text messages that surfaced, confirming the affair if the ex-husband of the subordinate came out and said this was happening, and this resulted in the subordinate committing, a horrible act of suicide. I don't think a company's board would tolerate it for a second. Just because they're in the House of Representatives, should it be different? No, I don't think so. But of course, politics is at play here, and this is what Mike Johnson is dealing with. He has a raised with the majority, as you noted, and he doesn't want to have life be any more miserable than it currently is. I mean, imagine having Tom Massey basically dictate what can pass through the House of Representatives, assuming anything passes at all. And earlier today,
Massey, by the way, hold on. Massey votes 96% of the time with the Republicans. He's got two big issues.
Well, he could be a thorn in Johnson's side and Trump's side for however long he wants to be in this scenario. I will say there was reports today of a Texas colleague of Gonzalez, Troy Nels, who was basically asked, should he go? And Nels was, points for being honest, I suppose. But Nels said, no, there's not in politics. What matters is politics. And, there aren't bigger issues than votes. And so he's being very candid about the motivations here for having Gonzalez stick around. I happen to be with Jake. I think they're just sort of holding to see what happens in this primary. And should Gonzalez lose, it's hard. It's really hard to imagine that he would just stick around and endure the ethics investigation.
Yeah, but Larry, isn't that so ugly? Politics is politics. This is a woman who died by suicide. The circumstances are awful, which seems to suggest that she was not emotionally that he might have, if this happened, that he was preying on somebody who was a victim here. And given the details of this, given the reporting around it, and again, I'm not going to go into more further details because again, it's sad and it's ugly. What does that mean for the broader Texas landscape? We're talking about a primary. Could this affect a general election?
Well, that's a 57% Trump district now. And so odds are the nominee will end up winning the general election, although it's not a big enough margin so you can absolutely rule out a Democratic victory if there's enough of a blue wave. But it does project a terrible image. After all, this is still, I think, the party of family values. It's hard to say that without laughing, particularly with Donald Trump being in charge of that party. But it's another layer of hypocrisy for Republicans. Now, let me take it from Gonzalez's perspective. I'm not going to say he really has much to stand on here, but from his perspective, I wonder how employable he is if he's forced to resign on this. And he has 10 months potentially to help the Republicans continue to maintain a majority vote whenever key votes come up. And he has 10 months of salary and 10 months of 18, 19 staff assistants working for him. Yes, it might be unpleasant, but lots of things in life are unpleasant. And obviously this fellow was perfectly happy to do unpleasant things, assuming the information that we've been given is accurate.
You're talking about family values, a party that bills themselves as that. There's the Gonzalez case here, but there's also Ken Paxton, who's dealing with his own set of allegations regarding that. Does it not threaten just a broader bad taste in the mouth of enough voters in Texas to say, maybe we're kind of tired of this party? If there is a tide turning in that state, and I know Democrats are always holding on to hope, it's the white whale, but does that fuel a potential turning of the tide, Larry?
Well, it helps. I don't think there's any question about that. Like all of you, I've been burned so often with the Texas is turning blue line, which you get every single election, and it hasn't happened. It almost happened with Beto O'Rourke, but that's the only example. So it's hard to believe this will be enough because Texas has become so thoroughly Republican, and the two most powerful letters in the English language are R and D, and R describes the Texas that exists today. In fact, it's been growing more Republican in many ways. So it's possible, but I certainly wouldn't put a nickel if we had to bet on it.
Sam, what about you?
I agree with Larry, although, I'm sort of reminded about the Mark Foley stuff back in 2006 when there's just enough bad taste in the mouth of voters where they look at the holistic picture. They say, and doesn't have to be sexual impropriety. It could be just corruption, right? that in that year, there were enough anecdotal moments of corruption on the Republican side of things to create a narrative. And it was notable, I will say, watching Abigail Spanberger last night, that she did really go hard on the corruption narrative in her speech, in her rebuttal speech to Donald Trump, talking about him enriching himself in the crypto businesses and things like that. Again, this doesn't necessarily relate to Gonzalez, but there are threads to tie this stuff together. You tie that to Epstein, you tie that to the elites, you tie that to people who think they can just get away with abhorrent behavior because they're in positions of power. And suddenly you have a fairly good, compelling election year slogan that you can use. Now, will it flip Texas? You know, what did Larry say? He wouldn't bet a nickel. I wouldn't bet a dime.